of Esther, the 4th chapter. And since we're starting Esther in sort of the middle of the story, let me recap what's happened up to this point. Esther is sort of like a novella. It's like a little story all in itself and was originally often performed as a play. So there's a theatrical element here. So here's where we are. The Jews are in exile, but the Babylonian captors of the Jews have been overthrown by the Persians. So now the king is Persian, and his name is Ahasuerus, but he's known as Xerxes. So Xerxes is married to Vashti, and she's this beautiful queen, and Xerxes really likes to party. So at the end of one of his months-long party, he tells Vashti to come and dance naked in front of everyone. You can wear your crown only, he says. And she's like, no. And he banishes her from the kingdom. So now he needs a new queen. So he has like the world's largest beauty pageant. And women are come from all over the kingdom, 127 provinces. They all come to sort of like compete to be the new queen. And they're trained in what the king especially likes, and they're introduced to him one by one. And Esther, for whom the book is named, is one of these women. Esther is a Jew, and she's an orphan, and she's raised by her uncle Mordecai. Now, in the Jewish tradition today, whenever this story is read, whenever Mordecai's name is said, you have to cheer. Okay? So we're going to do that today. Whenever I say Mordecai, you have to cheer. She's raised by Mordecai. Yay! Yay! And when she goes to the king, he tells her absolutely not to tell him that she's a Jew. And of course, Esther is chosen as the most beautiful woman, and she becomes the new queen. So things happen, and a conflict arises between Mordecai and a man named Haman. Now, whenever I say Haman, you have to boo. Boo. Haman is one of the king's right-hand men. And he gets mad at Mordecai and gives the king a bunch of money to issue an edict to kill all the Jews on a certain date. So the king agrees, and he issues this edict, and that's where today's reading starts. That was all your introduction. So now, listen to Esther chapter 4, verses 1 through 17, and you can continue to cheer and boo during the reading. That's fine. Listen for what God is saying to you today through these words. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off the sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. This is how I get y'all to listen to the story. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Shusha for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king and make supplication to him and to entreat him for her people. Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a message from Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to come in to the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go gather all of the Jews to be found in Shusha and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night and day, and I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Will the children come forward now? So it can be a good thing or a bad thing to have my mom as a member of my congregation, because I have a built-in sermon reviewer ready to give me feedback each week. And almost every week, Mom says, oh, it was a great sermon. I really liked it. So last week, I preached this sermon on hope. And before we were even home, Mom says, you forgot to say how painful hope can be. Sometimes you hope for things you know you're never going to get. Hope can be really awful. I don't like hope. What's next week's word? And I said, next week's word is peace. And she said, oh, good, I like peace. So here we are. When we say the word peace in the Bible, what we're really talking about is the Hebrew word shalom. And Neil Platinga writes this: the webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight is what the Hebrew prophets call shalom. We call it peace, but it means far more than mere peace of mind or a ceasefire between enemies. In the Bible, shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. Shalom, in other words, is the way things ought to be. Shalom is universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight, the way things ought to be. And I love this description of real peace. It's the vision we all have, isn't it, for our homes, our communities, our world? Justice, flourishing, wholeness, delight, the way things ought to be. But shalom doesn't just happen. It takes some intentionality. And this is where Esther comes in. Esther has become the queen. Uncle Mordecai and Haman have had a conflict. And the king has issued a decree that the Jews are to be killed. So now Uncle Mordecai is wearing his sackcloth and ashes. This is the wardrobe of grieving, of death. And he's not allowed to come into the gate because the king hates seeing this kind of thing. He doesn't want to be exposed to grieving and death. He doesn't want to be exposed to that kind of truth, that kind of reality. He says, keep things cheerful in my world. I don't want to know about any distress. His people don't want him to know about any distress. They don't want him to be mad. So there's a sort of covering up of the injustices that are happening in the kingdom. You can already see the problem, even with this law about what you can wear in front of the king. Well, at this point, Esther isn't concerned about changing the dress code. So she sends out some new clothes so that Mordecai can put them on and they can discuss the situation. But he refuses to do it. He refuses to cover up the problem. See, Mordecai has become a truth teller. And in the long run, Mordecai becomes a peacemaker. It's said that there's a difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. Peacekeepers are the ones who want to minimize the appearance of conflicts. They want to calm everyone down and not make a scene. Esther is being a peacekeeper here. But in the end, peacekeeping doesn't address the substance of the conflict, which is what Mordecai is trying to do here. He wants to call attention to the injustice of the coming destruction of his people. Peacekeepers may make things pleasant for the moment, at least for the people in control, but peacemakers are truth tellers. Peacekeepers look for an absence of conflict, but justice, fulfillment, and delight, shalom, this is what peacemakers are after. True peace, true shalom, as one of my colleagues writes, doesn't come from pretense. It comes from courage. And when faced with the reality of the situation, Esther will decide to take on the risk of standing up to the death-dealing powers rather than simply papering over the problem and pretending that everything is fine. So, Mordecai, yay! Come on, choir, I'm counting on you, Becky. Mordecai and Esther have a conversation, not directly with each other, but using trusted confidants to go back and forth and communicate. Mordecai, you'll remember, had originally told Esther not to reveal to the king that she was a Jew. He had told her not to. And now he says she needs to be truthful. She needs to tell him who she is and tell him what's happening. And she argues, you know I could die, right? I can't approach the king without an invitation. That's an immediate sentence of death. And he says, yes, but you're going to die anyway. And so are the rest of us, all of your people. He's going to find out that you're a Jew. He says, do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. And then he says, perhaps you won that beauty contest for just such a time as this. Then Esther said, in reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews to be found in Shusha and hold a fast on my behalf and neither eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maids will also fast as you do. And after that, I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther says, if I die, I die. She knows that she needs to find a way to tell the truth, to bring into light what has been hidden. Now, there's a curious thing about the book of Esther, which some of you may know. It is the only book of the Bible in which God is not mentioned. Can you believe that? Not in the whole book. We see signs of faith, but there's no mention of God and no mention of prayer to God. We have fasting, which usually goes along with prayer, but there's no mention of prayer. And yet you can see God working through the actions of Esther and Mordecai. Yay. And this is the truth that's brought to light, that Esther's story reveals, that even when God is hidden, God is still working. Even when God is not mentioned, God is still present. Even in the times when it seems like shalom is far, far away, whether those times are long ago or our present day, God is still actively creating universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. Later in the story of Esther, she will indeed reveal to the king who she is. She will tell the truth, and she will tell the truth about Mordecai and about Haman, who has orchestrated this plot against them. The king will overturn his decree. Haman, will be punished, and the Jews will be free to defend themselves. Will there be shalom? Not entirely. We still have a ways to go before we get there, but it's a start. God can use you to bring peace to the world if you're open to the call, if you're open to the risks, just as God used Esther. She was a young girl. She was a smart, brave peacemaker, not unlike another young girl who we remember during this season, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary also said yes to the call to bring shalom to the world. Esther said, "If I die, I die." And Mary said, "Let it be with me according to your word." Mary will speak of God like this: "Indeed, his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has come to the aid of his child Israel in remembrance of his mercy." Isn't this exactly what we see in the book of Esther? God brings down the powerful Haman, boo, and lifts up the lowly Mordecai, yay! And he comes to the aid of his child Israel even when his name is not mentioned. Friends, God is so good to us. And God's dream, God's promised kingdom is a kingdom of shalom, justice, wholeness, universal flourishing, delight. This is what we wait for during Advent. Not only waiting for Christmas morning and remembering the birth of the baby Jesus, but in waiting for that ultimate coming of God's kingdom. We wait for that time when we will all sit at God's table. We will all be at home, and it will be a home full of peace. People will come from east and west and from north and south, and we will sit together in the kingdom of God and share in that shalom. I invite you this week to look around for an opportunity to be a peacemaker rather than just a peacekeeper. Be a truth teller about who you are and who you know God to be. Create shalom in your house, in your community, in your world. And may God guide you and protect you. Amen. Amen. I invite you now to stand as we say together what we believe using the Apostles' Creed.